Good morning, my friends. Episode 70 of the Anno Domini podcast. It's good to be with you again, talking this week specifically about how powerful, how important, how critical it is for us to understand the Constitution of the United States of America, both for citizens and for immigrants. That is what I used to call the birthright certificate of our nation. And this is what makes us one, as it is going to be happening next week. You're already aware of that in Odessa, Noel Heritage Plaza, 7 p.m. We're going to be reading the entirety of the Constitution. We're not going to be reading the Bill of Rights for number one, the reason of time. It would add at least 30 minutes to the reading, and I don't want people to leave there after it is dark because it's getting darker earlier now, and it's getting dark earlier now. So this is reason number one. Number two is because of what Justice Antonin Scalia said on the video that I showed you on day one, Monday this week. The Bill of Rights is just something that every country in the world has. In some cases, in some instances, as he said, even giving more rights than the Bill of Rights in the United States of America give people. So we are going to focus on the Constitution from Article 1 to Article 7, and we're going to read all the sections, all the clauses, every single one of the lines. And the beautiful things this time, we're going to be, this activity is going to be done by or carried out by people, not only American citizens, but American citizens that came from countries from all across the planet. We have, say, 16, 17 countries: Italy, England, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Italy, I have already mentioned Italy, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Colombia. So you have it. There you have it. We have many people, several countries of the world. It's going to be a celebration, and I really, really wanted you to be a part of that with us. Without further ado, let's dive into our class today, or our meditation today, on the grievances. As I mentioned yesterday, that today we would be diving into a couple of examples that were laid out in the Declaration of Independence. In this case, the grievances that Thomas Jefferson takes note of. The King of England has been doing this, 28 grievances against us. And we are going to respond to those grievances after we have our Declaration of Independence, after we split, after we separate from the British Empire, the British government, the British monarchy. Now we are going to counter that. The grievances to which the grievances presented to the king, now we have a response to that. We have an answer to that. We have an exit door for that. And those exit doors are quite clearly laid out in the provisions of the Constitution. And we are going to meditate upon some of them today, line by line. I am not going to read the entirety of the provisions of the Constitution because they elaborate in a long way about them. But I am going to put the entirety of the grievances that Thomas Jefferson takes note of, so that we understand where they're coming from, where they're going to. Okay, so let's do it. Grievance number 3. So I picked a couple of them here that are clearly and more clearly understood when you read them at face value. So here's the first one. Grievance number 3. The king has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. So the grievance here is the lack of representation of areas where there are many people. So the king did not want that to happen. This again, face value and the heart of the grievance. This is their complaint. What is the response in the Constitution, 1787? The provision for that grievance, or the answer to that grievance, is on Article 1, Section 2, that says each state must have at least one representative in the House. The House has the sole power of impeachment, including impeachment of the president. House members are elected every 2 years. You see that they come up with a very direct response to the grievance, complaining about what the king was not doing. They have an answer to that. If they were complaining about the lack of representation on the part of the king, or the allowance of the king, the permission of the king for people to be represented, the provision, Article 1, Section 2 in the Constitution lays out how that should happen. So each state will have at least one representative. And then now we understand that the idea is, according to the population of the state, there will be a certain number of representatives. Later on, about the Senate, it's 2 senators per state, regardless of population, because the senators are representing the state, not the population. So representatives represent people. Senators represent state. So they laid out it very clear in Article 1, Section 2, especially about the representatives. Grievance number 4. The king has called together legislative bodies at places unusual and also uncomfortable and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. So the king was forcing them, and forcing legislative body, meaning representative bodies, to meet, to get together in unusual places, in distant and far away places, in uncomfortable places, for the purpose of discouraging them to get together and to represent the people. What was the response in the Constitution? Provision was Article 1, Section 5, Clause 4. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, meaning the Congress is now the one responsible to determine the rules of proceedings, the rules of gatherings, and what they should do and should not do, where they would establish the offices and the places of gathering. So it is a direct response to that, the king's unwillingness to accommodate for those representatives that wanted to represent the people, but were put in a very hard, very tough situation in terms of distance, in terms of accommodations, in terms of comfort. So it is a direct response. Provision in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 4, is a direct answer to grievance number 4 in the Declaration of Independence. Grievance number 5. The king has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions and on the rights of the people. So the king was not happy with representatives of the people to oppose him firmly, because he was invading the rights of the people. So that was one of the grievances that produced the Declaration of Independence. So now what are we going to do about the grievance? Since we were complaining against the king for doing that, we should not do that. We, the founding fathers, should not do that. What are we going to do? What is the provision in the Constitution? Article 1, Section 4, Clause number 2. Congress defines when and where they shall assemble at least once in every year. So if you read the entirety of Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, you will understand how they deal with this understanding behind grievance number 5, that the king was making the lives of representatives very hard because they were opposing his invasion of rights of the people. So now that power comes to the Congress. It is given to Congress. This is why Congress is the most powerful branch of government. It's not the executive, as many people believe. People like me that came from a Latin American country, the figure of the president is the most powerful one, right? And here in America, it's becoming this way, like increasingly becoming this way, which is very sad because the Constitution is so clear about the first power. The first branch of government is Congress, so meaning that is the branch that represents the majority of people in their needs and desires and their plans for the future. So go there to Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, and you will see how they fully respond to grievance number 5, as we just saw here very briefly in a summarized version. Grievance number 7, the king has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, talking about immigration here, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So what is the response to that grievance? Because the king was preventing population of states that had come from other places to be naturalized, so that they would be, of course, natural representations or natural representatives, or their voice would be powerful. Their voice should be heard once they were naturalized. The king was refusing to do that. He was refusing to encourage migration, and he was doing the best he could in order to prevent people from migrating from the kingdom, from Great Britain to the New World, to America. The provision, the response to that is in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, and it says that clause says or gives Congress the power to establish uniform rules of naturalization. Again, give that power to Congress. Kings or the president should not have the power to define naturalization or immigration laws. Congress has that power, should have that power. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, this is a provision in the U.S. Constitution, gives Congress the power to establish uniform rules of naturalization, regulate conduct of aliens before naturalization, determine when foreign nationals may obtain U.S. citizenship. And this is what happens today. I am an immigrant. I am a foreigner. I've been here for 8 years. And I have very clear regulations and conducts and norms and laws that I have to follow. For example, as an asylee, I cannot, by law, still, not yet, I cannot purchase a gun. I cannot own a gun, and I cannot put a gun on myself and just walk around with a gun as a born citizen can. Where was that law created, or by whom was that law created? Not by the king, not by the president, not by the head of the executive office, but or branch, but by the Congress. So those are provisions in the Constitution giving the Congress the powers to deal with immigration issues. Grievance number 8. The king has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent or his agreement to laws for establishing judiciary powers. Remember that the judiciary in this time was just a sequence, just a continuation, just a branch, so to speak, of the king himself. The judges were, they pledged allegiance to the king, not to the people, not to the laws, but to what the king decided that was right or wrong. What is the provision in the Constitution for grievance number 8? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9 gives Congress the power, again, back to Congress. It gives Congress the power to establish lower federal courts or tribunals that are subordinate to the Supreme Court. So they create a Supreme Court, meaning a third branch of government that had not been seen yet, at least not fully in history. The Roman Republic had somehow a Supreme Court, but again, that court was connected with the king, the monarch, the emperor, Caesar, not a separate branch of government. This power is granted to Congress in accordance with the vesting clause of Article 3. Remember that Article 1 relates to the legislative body. Article 3 in the Constitution relates to the judicial body, which places the judicial power of the U.S. in the Supreme Court and any inferior courts that Congress may establish. You see that they are given the power by the Constitution, the Congress given the power to define the courts, starting with the Supreme Court and the lower courts, but now they give them the power to regulate the judicial branch on themselves or by themselves on their own. And of course, this third branch of government has to be bound by the laws created by the legislative body, but that is their action field. The space that they have to act is only those spaces provided by the laws passed by Congress. Okay? So that is very clear here. Grievance number 11. The king has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. The king is keeping among us at our expense. We are paying for that in times of peace. We're not even in war or at war with anybody, but we have to feed armies. We have to feed people. We have to feed soldiers. We have to shelter them, meaning that we don't have our private homes anymore. And this was not even consented by the representatives of the people. What is the provision of that in the Constitution? Article 1, Section 8, Clause number 12, gives Congress the power to raise and support armies, but with some limitations, with time limits, appropriations, meaning getting money from the people in the form of taxation to the army or for the army cannot be for more than 2 years. This is why, to this day, the Appropriations Committee, both in the House and the Senate, every 2 years, they have to come out and ask the people for the permit, for the confirmation of the people for more money for the armies, for the armed forces, right? So this is so messed up today. Today, as we speak, 2024, it is so messed up because we have a lot of lobbyists in the process, not only in this area, but in all areas. But again, this was the original intent of the Constitution, that this provision says that nobody can have or should have standing armies in times of peace that were not confirmed by Congress. And when we say by Congress, we're talking about the representatives of the people. So the people have a voice. The people have to have a voice. Grievance number 12. The king has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Let me read that again. The king has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. And they said that should not happen. The military should not be superior to the civil power, to the people. What is the provision in the Constitution? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 gives Congress the power to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. Care for armed forces. It takes care of armed forces. Try and punish servicemen, courts martial. Try and punish civilians and dependents, court martial. So again, it gives the Congress, it gives the representatives of the people the power to rule and to govern over, to regulate land and naval forces, armed forces, punish servicemen, court-martial them. The Congress has the power to do that. So this is very important for everything that we're living right now. We are somehow expecting that the military is going to, court-martial their own. They can do that. They did that many times in the past. But right now, everybody is just looking at the wrong place for court-martialing people among us, representatives or politicians, or people in general, even including military people. We're looking at at the wrong place for court-martials or court-martialing. The correct place for that is the Congress, according to Article 1, Section 8, Clause number 12. Another grievance 14. For quartering, the king quartered large bodies of armed troops among us. So we're again related to the previous grievance. What is the provision in the Constitution? It is the Third Amendment. Soldiers cannot be quartered in private homes without the owner's consent during times of peace. In times of war, soldiers may be quartered in the manner prescribed by law. And what is the law? The law is that they should not kick families out of their homes in order to quarter officers or soldiers, right? So this means that the people would have to put their monies in their hands into their pockets and their wallets and give the body, the federal government, money to feed, to quarter, to shelter the soldiers. So this is the agreement here. We're not going to use your home anymore as the king used to do, but you need to give us some money so that we can do that and take care of our soldiers. So that is provided and very clearly provided in the Third Amendment, by the Third Amendment. Grievance number 18, I think this is the last one for today. The king was depriving the people back then, in many cases, of the benefit of jury trial. So the king was just convicting people at his will, at will. I don't like this person. This person doesn't need a jury trial because this person is just a subject. She or he, they don't need to be defended. I am the king. My word, my voice, and my command needs to be obeyed, complied with, and that's it. What is the provision in the Constitution? The Sixth and the Seventh Amendments. Sixth Amendment says, against this idea that the king can do anything in a jury trial or do not give people jury trials. The Sixth Amendment protects the rights of the accused in criminal prosecutions. It states that the accused has the right to a speedy and public trial, an impartial jury. This person needs to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. This person has the right to confront witnesses against him or her, them. Compulsory process for obtaining witness in their favor, the assistance of counsel for their defense. So no, the king cannot say you are convicted and the person is convicted. There is the right now of a jury trial provided by the Sixth Amendment, and in the Seventh Amendment, it protects the right to a jury trial in civil cases in federal courts. It also prevents judges from overturning facts found by a jury in these trials. So you see that the grievances are very clear. They separated from England, from Great Britain, for very clear reasons, and they write into the Declaration of Independence 28 grievances, but now they have 28 answers, 28 responses or provisions to each one of the grievances in this document that we call the U.S. Constitution. So let us apply now into the practical world the grievances that we might have today against our government. And oh boy, how I think I believe it's many more than 28, right? We have a lot of grievances. And I'm going to show you these theories carried out and implemented into the practical world. You're going to watch a video about the COVID pandemic, as we now know, and you're going to see a lawyer, a guy that understands deeply the laws of the U.S. Constitution and the legalities of everything that happened in between 2020 until 2023. For 2 years, we were just pressed and crushed by governments all across the planet, and especially in America, telling us what to do, what not to do, without them having the power in the Constitution to do that. So let me show you a video, and I'm going to get back with you at the end of it. Pay attention to the video. There's a lot to learn here. Here we go.
The tyranny that we've lived through the last couple of years, this COVID stuff, if we were to have adhered to the Constitution's original intent, would any of that look different? Whether how states responded or the government's recommendations?
Yeah. That's a huge topic. I'm going to touch on it somewhat briefly.
Yeah.
More brief than maybe
briefly is all we got time for.
That's fine. And, on the one hand, people will often say things are unconstitutional when they recognize it violates principles of liberty.
Yeah.
But under the U.S. Constitution, the states were free to do a lot of things that the federal government was not. Mm-hmm. So certain things might or might not be within state power. But separate from that, I want to focus on, when we're talking about constitutionality, the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And in that regard, what the federal government did in response, I think, is where I want to focus my commentary.
There'd be no DPHHS, for instance, right?
Now that's
so we have no point. Fauci sitting up in.
There's no Fauci. There's no gain of function research. And would it have ever been a pandemic in the first place?
Would there be a CDC?
No. Yeah, there shouldn't be a CDC.
No CDC guidelines.
No HHS.
Fauci.
So there's no national guidelines. There's none of this.
Yeah. Well, this sounds like chaos, Robert. Who's gonna take care of us?
It's called freedom. And Thomas Jefferson talked about he'd much rather hazard the dangers of too much freedom than go through the tyranny of too little freedom. And that's a very rough paraphrase. He said it much more eloquently. But I totally agree with that a little bit of having a little too much freedom is really a good thing.
Can we handle too much freedom today?
And now one of the things here, and that's a great question. I wanted to expand on that question. If the federal government wasn't involved in our schools and healthcare and all these different things, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean we won't have schools.
Right.
It doesn't mean we're not going to have healthcare. It just means it's not their jurisdiction.
Right. Which it was never in the first place.
It was never supposed to be. And if things were in state jurisdiction or even local jurisdiction, it creates much more competition. Let's take, for example, the Obamacare, as it's nicknamed. National Health Care Act.
Yeah.
No constitutional authority to have that. I'll go against the Supreme Court on that one. But what it was supposed to be is on the state level, if at all. And of course, Obamacare was modeled after Romney Care, as it was nicknamed, Massachusetts version, which was a failure already, and they still decided to model it after it. Mm-hmm. If instead of that, we had allowed competition between the states, keeping this at the state level. Let's say, for example, that Wisconsin looks at the Massachusetts model and say, well, that didn't work very well. Let's do a different model that at least doesn't bankrupt the state.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Literally, Massachusetts had to get bailouts from the federal government to keep it going. It was that bad. And so let's say Wisconsin comes up with their model that is at least financially stable. Still not perfect. And then, of course, my state in Utah, we come up with the even better model that starts bringing healthcare costs down. And other states are looking at these three models and, well, the Utah model is better than the other two. And then say Arizona comes up with one that even improves upon Utah's and so on. That competition is healthy. Whereas one size fits all for the entire country, and we're going to make that one size the failed model out of Massachusetts. That's exactly the worst way we could do it.
Well, without like a competition, there's no reason to improve. The DMV is always mentioned. Why is the DMV? The DMV is the only place, right? You can get your driver's license and all this stuff. There's no other place. And so you walk in there and lollygagging around, there's a big line. And I think that's really reflective of what happens when there's no competition. And that's why nearly everything by government is run so badly. There is no competition. They have nothing to lose. Your taxpayers are going into their pockets regardless. It's tragic.
So there you go. Practical world, right? What happened in the 2 years of COVID. But again, they mentioned education, they mentioned healthcare, they mentioned several other items or issues here. And again, the federal government should not be there at all. Somehow Trump understands that. He said that he's going to overhaul and he's going to eliminate the Secretary of Education or the ministry or the education ministry, whatever you call that, in Washington, D.C. It should be done with a lot of these 456 agencies, regulatory agencies, all across the spectrum of policies in the country. Because right now we don't have, and I learned this after I moved to America. I did not know that before 8 years ago. I thought that, as would be expected, policies were made by lawmakers, right? Lawmakers are paid $180,000 a year to make laws, to discuss laws, to argue laws. And then I found out that there are at least 100 agencies, or let us call them by what they are. They are outside firms in Washington, D.C., that are paid with taxpayer money, paid to write the laws for the lawmakers. And then the lawmakers just bring those ideas of laws to be discussed inside of the Congress, I mean, in the committees, and then to be passed in the plenary sessions. So this is not at all what the founding fathers had in mind 250 years ago. They are not today, they are not even coming up with the idea of even thinking about policies anymore. They just outsourced it to somebody else. And of course, they are paid millions and billions of dollars. So everything is upside down. The federal government grew excessively big. And now we have here a reason, a very clear reason why the anti-federalists did not want the Constitution the way it was, because it was giving a lot of powers to the federal government, so much so that Rhode Island did not ratify the Constitution. So out of the 13 colonies, Rhode Island refused to sign the ratification of the Constitution in 1787 because Rhode Island was still adamantly against the idea of giving that much power to the federal level. Although the Federalists promised the Bill of Rights. So now somehow Brutus, the anti-federalists, they were proven right in time, right? In 200 years, they somehow were proven right. So we don't know what to do next. The idea that I have in my mind is that Washington, D.C. has to be, as they call a lot, they say this a lot, reset, the Great Reset. The Great Reset should be in Washington, D.C., should happen in Washington, D.C. But anyways, that's not my point here today. I just wanted to excuse me, expose you to that reality of the theories of the Declaration of Independence and the practicalities of those points in the U.S. Constitution, and how brilliant our founding fathers were by bringing the grievances. But we have an answer to that. Here are the answers, the provisions in the Constitution. So I hope that you can follow us again tomorrow for our last, at least this week, the Friday's edition of the Anno Domini podcast episode. And I'm going to wrap up this issue on the Constitution. And next week, we're going to start talking about the Constitution, preparing ourselves Monday and Tuesday. So Tuesday is the big day, Constitution Day, the public reading in Odessa. But I'm going to be bringing more on the Constitution so you can enjoy, be blessed. And I hope that you can be with us tomorrow morning for episode 71 of the Anno Domini podcast. God bless you. See you there. Bye-bye.